He looked at my newborn baby in the incubator, wiped his hands as if he were dirty, and called her defective stock. Then he pulled out a contract and demanded I repay $50,000 immediately. My father-in-law, Arthur, is a man who owns skyscrapers, yet he evicted his own son and granddaughter because my baby has Down syndrome. He told us she damaged his family brand. I am shaking as I type this. I am writing this from a rusted car because he just offered my husband a trust fund of $2 million on one condition. He must divorce me and marry a woman with clean genetics to produce a replacement heir. How much is a human soul worth? Is it worth $2 million? Because for a split second, when I looked at my sick child who needs heart surgery, I actually considered his offer. I considered selling my marriage to the devil to save my daughter. God help me. I do not know if I want justice or revenge. What would you do if you held the life of a monster in your hands? My name is Sophie. I am 38 years old, and if you saw me in the frozen food aisle at Whole Foods in Westport, Connecticut, you would think I had it all. I drive a charcoal gray sport utility vehicle that costs more than my parents' entire house in Ohio. I wear cashmere sweaters that require dry cleaning I never pay for personally. I used to be an interior designer, a woman with an eye for potential, capable of walking into a dilapidated room and envisioning a sanctuary. Now, my profession is listed simply as homemaker on tax returns. I am not allowed to read. I live in a world where silence is expensive, and perfection is the only currency accepted. My husband, Mark, is a good man, or at least, he tries to be when the shadow of his father does not eclipse the sun. We live in a sprawling colonial estate that smells perpetually of lemon polish and old money. A house that belongs to my father-in-law, Arthur. We are merely guests who overstayed our welcome, tenants paying rent with our dignity. For the past 5 years, my life has been a meticulously curated performance. I smile at charity galas. I nod politely when Arthur lectures Mark about his lack of ambition during Sunday dinners. I pretend not to notice how my husband's hand trembles when he pours wine for his father. But beneath the calm surface of our affluent suburban existence, there were always signs, little red flags that I chose to ignore because the alternative was admitting I had made a terrible mistake. It started with the way Arthur looked at me the first time we met. He did not look at my eyes. He looked at my hips, then my teeth, like he was buying a racehorse. It continued with the prenuptial agreement that was thicker than a phone book, and it culminated in our struggle to conceive. In Arthur's world, everything is a transaction. You pay for a service, you get a result. If the result is not delivered, you demand a refund. That is how he built his empire in commercial real estate, and that is how he runs his family. When Mark and I could not conceive naturally, Arthur did not offer sympathy. He offered frustration. He looked at us as if we were a broken vending machine that had swallowed his quarters. We needed in vitro fertilization. It was expensive, grueling, and emotionally bankrupting. Mark's salary at his father's firm was controlled down to the cent, barely enough to cover our lifestyle, let alone tens of thousands of dollars for fertility treatments. Mark was too terrified to ask Arthur for the money. He would rather remain childless than admit a biological failing to the patriarch. So, I did it. I thought to myself that that was my first sin. Desperation is a funny thing. It makes you justify the unjustifiable. I told myself I was doing it for Mark, for us, but deep down, I think I just wanted to prove Arthur wrong. I wanted to produce the heir he demanded, to cement my place in this cold mausoleum of a family. I thought a baby would fix everything. I was so incredibly stupid. I went to Arthur behind Mark's back. I sat in his mahogany-paneled study, the air smelling of stale cigar smoke and intimidation. I asked for a loan, not a gift. A loan. Arthur had smiled then. It was a reptilian smile, devoid of warmth. He slid a contract across the desk. It was a personal loan agreement for $50,000. The terms were strict, but the interest was low. I signed it without reading the fine print. I would have signed away my soul just to feel life growing inside me, and it worked. Or so I thought. 9 months later, the illusion of our perfect future shattered in a sterile delivery room at Greenwich Hospital. The labor had been long and difficult. When the baby finally arrived, there was no cinematic cry, no immediate rush of relief. There was a thick, heavy silence that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. The nurses exchanged glances. The doctor, a man we had paid a fortune to for his discretion and skill, cleared his throat with an uncomfortable sound. They placed her on my chest. My Bella. She was small, her skin slightly mottled. I looked at her almond-shaped eyes, the slight flatness of her facial profile, the single crease across her tiny palm. I knew, even before the doctor said the words, trisomy 21, I knew. Mark stood by the bedside, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the door, as if expecting an executioner to walk in, and he did. Arthur walked into the recovery room 20 minutes later. He did not bring flowers. He did not bring balloons. He walked in with the stride of a chief executive officer inspecting a failing branch office. He was wearing a 3-piece suit, impeccable and sharp enough to cut skin. "Let me see," Arthur commanded. It was not a request. I held Bella tighter to my chest. "She is sleeping." "Arthur," I said, "let me see the child." Mark stepped aside, his head bowed. I thought to myself that my husband is a coward. Arthur leaned over the bed. He did not reach out to touch his granddaughter. He did not offer a finger for her to grasp. He simply stared. He scrutinized her features with a cold, clinical detachment. He looked at her eyes, her ears, air hands. The silence stretched for an eternity, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Then, Arthur straightened up. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands. Even though he had touched nothing. "Defective," he said. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. "Excuse me?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and rising fury. Arthur turned his gaze to Mark, completely ignoring me. "She has Down syndrome, does she not? Do not lie to me. I can see it. The eyes, the neck." Mark nodded. A single, jerky motion. "Yes, Dad. The doctors suspect Saoting Haling. Jinhao Dayu." "Suspect?" Arthur scoffed. "It is obvious. You have produced a liability. Mark, a genetic dead end. She is your granddaughter." I snapped, the protective instinct overriding my fear. "Her name is Bella." Arthur finally looked at me. His eyes were like chips of ice. "She is a burden, a drain on resources. I expected a return on my investment. Sophie, I expected an heir who could run the company, not one who will need a caretaker until the day she dies." He leaned in close to my face. I could smell his expensive cologne, a scent that now made me want to retch. He lowered his voice so that only I could hear, his lips barely moving. "You signed a contract, Sophie." My heart hammered against my ribs. The loan, the agreement was for the funding of a viable pregnancy. Arthur whispered, his voice like dry leaves scraping together. You used my $50,000 to manufacture a defective product. You violated the terms of our agreement. I felt the blood drain from my face. He was not talking about a baby. He was talking about a commodity, a car with a bad engine, a building with a cracked foundation. He did not see a human being. He saw a breach of contract. I want my money back. Arthur hissed, his eyes boring into mine. $50,000 plus interest. Demand is effective immediately. I, 小于井号0 2 hash is greater than I do not have it. I stammered, clutching Bella so hard she squirmed. You know I do not have it. I have not worked in 3 years. Then you better figure it out, Arthur said, straightening his jacket. Or I will take everything else. I own the house you sleep in. I own the car you drive. You think you are safe because you married my son? Mark has never made a decision without my permission in his life. Do not test me. He turned to leave, pausing at the door to look at Mark, who was still staring at the floor. Do not put pictures of that creature on social media, Arthur commanded. It is bad for the brand. We will tell people there were complications. Keep her out of sight. With that, he walked out. The door clicked shut, leaving us in the heavy silence of the hospital room. I looked down at Bella. She was awake now, looking up at me with innocent, trusting eyes. She had no idea that in the span of 5 minutes, she had been disowned, labeled a defect, and priced at $50,000. I looked at Mark, waiting for him to explode, to chase after his father, to defend us, but he just sank into the visitor's chair and put his head in his hands. I am sorry, Sophie, he mumbled into his palms. I looked at my husband, this broken man, and I realized then that I was completely alone. The man I married was just a puppet, and the man pulling the strings had just declared war on my daughter. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, a hard, jagged shard of ice that replaced the warmth of hope I had carried for 9 months. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a trophy wife from a middle-class family who would roll over and cry. Arthur thought Bella was a mistake, but as I ran my finger over her soft cheek, I made a silent vow. I would not cry. Not today. Today, I would start keeping score. The nurse walked in, cheerful and oblivious. Time for her first feeding. How is Grandpa? Was he excited? I looked up at her, my eyes dry and burning. He was thrilled. I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. He could not stay long. Business to attend to. Oh, well, the nurse chirped. At least you have a beautiful, healthy family. I looked out the window at the gray Connecticut sky. The storm was coming, and for the first time in my life, I knew I had to be the lightning, not the shelter. The air at the estate always tasted different, thinner somehow, as if the oxygen content was strictly regulated for tax purposes. We were at Arthur's Greenwich mansion, a sprawling structure of stone and glass that looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum for the living. It was late August, 6 months after Bella was born, and the heat hung heavy over the manicured lawns. We were there to celebrate Kevin, my nephew, the son of Mark's sister, Karen. Kevin was turning 5 years old, and Arthur had spared no expense. A white silk tent had been erected in the rose garden, large enough to house a small circus. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets moved through the crowd like ghosts, carrying silver trays of champagne and caviar blinis. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The the music floating over the chatter of 50 wealthy guests who were more interested in networking than singing happy birthday. I held Bella against my chest, shielding her from the sun with a linen blanket. She was quiet today, her small body warm and heavy in my arms. I had dressed her in a pale yellow dress with a matching bow, trying to make her look perfect, trying to make her look like she belonged. I adjusted the bow for the 10th time, my fingers nervous and trembling. Mark stood beside me, swirling the ice in his scotch glass. He had been drinking since we arrived. It was his armor. When he was sober, he was my husband. When he drank around his father, he became a shadow, fading into the background to avoid being stepped on. I thought to myself, look at him. Look at how he shrinks. He is 6 feet tall, but in this house, he is a child waiting for permission to speak. Arthur stood at the head of the garden, holding court. He wore a linen suit that cost more than my car, his white hair perfectly coiffed. Beside him stood Karen, glowing with the pride of a woman who had delivered the golden goose. And there was Kevin, running around in a miniature version of Arthur's suit, stomping on the flower beds while the guests laughed indulgently. I watched Arthur lean down and scoop Kevin up. He never held Bella, not once in 6 months. But with Kevin, he was the picture of a doting grandfather. He lifted the boy high in the air, beaming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur boomed, his voice projecting effortlessly across the lawn without a microphone. "May I have your attention, please?" The music stopped. The chatter died down. All eyes turned to the patriarch. "Today we celebrate not just a birthday, but a milestone," Arthur announced, placing a heavy hand on Kevin's shoulder. "This young man represents the future of our family. He has the spirit, the energy, and the intelligence that this lineage demands." Arthur snapped his fingers, and an assistant hurried forward with a large, velvet-covered box. "I have opened a custodial brokerage account in Kevin's name," Arthur continued, his voice swelling with pride. 50,000 shares of the family holding company. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Applause broke out, polite but envious. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. 50,000 shares. The value was astronomical. "He is the heir apparent," someone shouted from the back, and laughter rippled through the tent. Arthur smiled, but his eyes were serious. "He is indeed." "To Kevin, to Kevin," the crowd echoed. Mark took a long swallow of his drink. He did not raise his glass. I looked at him, waiting for a reaction. A flicker of anger. Anything, but his face was blank. A mask of practiced indifference. I looked down at Bella. She was sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware that her cousin had just been handed an empire while she had been branded a debt. The contrast was so sharp it felt like a physical blow. Kevin was the asset. Bella was the liability. "Let us get a family photo," Karen squealed, waving at the photographer hired for the event. "Come on, everyone. Mom, Dad, Mark, Sophie, come on." This was the moment I had been dreading. We shuffled toward the grand staircase that led down to the garden. The photographer, a young man with a ponytail who looked terrified of Arthur, began arranging us. Arthur and his wife stood in the center. Karen and Kevin were positioned prominently in the front. Mark and I were directed to the side. I stepped forward, holding Bella. I wanted her in the picture. I needed her in the picture. Proof that she existed. Proof that she was part of this family. The photographer raised his camera. "Okay. Big smiles, everyone. On 3. 1, 2, Saoyu Jinghaoling. Jinghao Dayu. Wait. Arthur's voice was low, but it stopped the photographer cold. Arthur did not turn his head. He stared straight at the camera lens, his smile fixed and terrifying. Mark, Arthur said, his lips barely moving. Why do you not step to the back row with Sophie? And Sophie, Saoyu Jinghaoling. 2 hash is greater than. Perhaps it would be better if you put the baby in the stroller. Over there, out of the frame. The silence that followed was deafening. The birds seemed to stop singing. The guests who were watching pretended to look away, examining their fingernails or their shoes. But I knew they were listening. I froze. I felt the blood rush to my face. Hot and stinging. Excuse me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Arthur turned to me then. His eyes were flat and hard, like stones at the bottom of a river. We want a clean shot. Sophie, he said, his tone reasonable, as if explaining a simple math problem to a slow child. The lighting is tricky. The stroller is better for her. She looks. Saoyu Jinghaoling. 2 hash is greater than tired. He was not talking about the lighting. He was talking about her face. He did not want a Down syndrome baby in the official portrait of his legacy. He did not want the blemish on his brand. I looked at Mark. Do something. I screamed silently. Defend your daughter. Tell him to go to hell. Mark looked at his father, then at me. His eyes were watery and defeated. Just do it. Sophie, Mark whispered, his voice thick with shame. Please, do not make a scene. Do not make a scene. That was the family motto. My hands shook as I walked over to the stroller parked in the shade of a large oak tree. I laid Bella down. She stirred slightly but did not wake. I felt like I was abandoning her. I felt like I was agreeing with him. I walked back to the group. I stood in the back row, behind Karen's massive hat. I smiled when the photographer said cheese. I smiled until my jaw ached. But inside, something fundamental had snapped. After the photo, the party resumed. I needed to escape. I needed air that did not smell of hypocrisy. I wandered toward the patio, intending to find a bathroom where I could lock the door and scream. As I rounded the corner of the veranda, I heard voices. It was Arthur. He was speaking with 2 men in dark suits, partners from his firm. I stopped, hidden by a large potted fern. Fine boy, that Kevin, one of the men said. Sharp. Yes, Arthur replied. His voice was relaxed, the voice of a man among peers. He has good stock. It is important to maintain quality control in any enterprise, including family. A pity about Mark's situation, though, the other man said, lowering his voice. I heard the child is Saoyu Jinghaoling. 2 hash is greater than challenged. Arthur chuckled. A dry, rasping sound. Challenged is a polite word for it. Arthur said, I call it a bad audit. You know how it is. Gentlemen, sometimes you invest in a property, and the foundation is rotten. Mark has always been soft. It is no surprise his offspring is defective. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. Is there any recourse? The first man asked. Arthur took a sip of his drink. I could hear the ice clinking against the glass. I am handling it, Arthur said coolly. I have categorized the child as a non-performing asset, a liability. I have made it clear to Mark that his inheritance is contingent on performance. If he wants to keep his lifestyle, he will need to rectify his portfolio. Perhaps try again with better stock, or a different merger partner. A different merger partner. He meant a new wife. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my throat like a trapped bird. He was not just disappointed. He was actively plotting to replace me, to replace Bella. We were just numbers on a spreadsheet to him, red ink that needed to be erased. I found Mark by the open bar. He was laughing too loudly at a joke I knew he did not understand. He looked flushed and sweaty. "We are leaving," I said, grabbing his arm. "What?" Mark stumbled slightly. "We cannot leave yet. Dad has not cut the cake." "I do not care about the cake," I hissed, leaning close to his ear. "We are leaving. Now. Or I am walking home on the highway with Bella in my arms." Mark looked at me, seeing the wild look in my eyes. He nodded slowly, setting his glass down. "Okay," he said. "Okay." We drove home in silence. The silence was thick and suffocating, filled with the things we were not saying. Mark stared out the window at the passing trees. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He did not defend us. He heard the insults. He saw the exclusion, and he did nothing. He was afraid of losing the money. He was afraid of losing the house. I looked in the rearview mirror at Bella, sleeping in her car seat. She looked so peaceful, so perfect. I realized then that the enemy was not just the man in the mansion. The enemy was sleeping in the passenger seat next to me. The enemy was my own naivety. Arthur was right about one thing. This was a business, and if I wanted to survive, if I wanted Bella to survive, I needed to stop acting like a mother and start thinking like a chief executive officer. I needed to protect my asset. I glanced at Mark one last time. He had fallen asleep, his mouth slightly open, looking weak and foolish. The first crack had appeared in the foundation of our marriage, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the whole house was going to come down. The morning the envelope arrived, the sky was a bruised shade of purple, the kind of heavy, low-hanging, overcast that promises a storm but refuses to break. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays were usually safe. Tuesdays were for grocery shopping and pediatric appointments, and pretending that my life was not slowly unraveling at the seams. I was in the kitchen, feeding Bella her breakfast. She was 6 months old now, struggling to hold her head up, her movements softer and slower than other infants her age. Every time she managed to swallow a spoonful of pureed carrots without choking, I felt a surge of victory so fierce it almost brought me to tears. It was us against the world in that kitchen, just me and my beautiful, imperfect girl against the silence of the big, empty house. The doorbell rang. It was not the friendly chime of a neighbor. It was a sharp, insistent buzz that demanded attention. I wiped orange puree from Bella's chin, hoisted her onto my hip, and walked to the front door through the frosted glass. I saw the silhouette of a uniform, not the regular mail carrier, who wore shorts and whistled. This was a courier. I opened the door. The man on the porch did not smile. He held a flat, rigid cardboard envelope with a red stripe across the top. "Sophie Miller?" he asked, looking at his electronic tablet rather than my face. "Yes," I answered. "Sign here." I scribbled my name with a trembling finger. The stylus felt slippery. "Have a nice day," he said, in a tone that suggested he knew exactly what he had just delivered and knew that I would definitely not have a nice day. I closed the heavy oak door and locked it. The lock made a solid, reassuring thunk, but I knew it was a lie. Locks keep intruders out. They do not protect you from the rot inside. I carried the envelope to the kitchen island. The return address was embossed in black ink. Henderson, Blackwood and Associates. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. That was Arthur's law firm, not the one he used for his corporate mergers, but the one he used for his dirty work. The fixers, the ones who buried zoning violations and silenced mistresses. I put Bella in her high chair. She cooed and banged her plastic spoon against the tray. The sound was the only thing grounding me to reality. I tore open the tab. Inside, there were 2 documents. The paper was thick, creamy, and expensive. The words printed on it were razor blades. The first document was titled, Notice of Default and Acceleration of Debt. I read the legalese, my breath catching in my throat. Pursuant to the promissory note dated October 14th, 2018, between Sophie Miller, the borrower, and Arthur Miller, the lender, Xiaoyu Jinghao Ling, R. Jinghao Daiyu. The lender hereby declares the borrower to be in breach of the implied covenants of said agreement. Xiaoyu Jinghao Ling, R. Jinghao Daiyu. Immediate repayment of the principal sum of $50,000 plus accrued interest is demanded within 48 hours. I felt the room spin. 48 hours. He wanted the in vitro fertilization money back. He was actually doing it. He was calling in a loan on his own grandchild's existence because she did not meet his quality standards. But it was the second document that made my knees buckle. Notice to quit premises. To Mark Miller and Sophie Miller. You are hereby notified that your tenancy at the property located at 44 Oakwood Drive is terminated, effective immediately. The owner of record, the Arthur Miller Revocable Trust, demands possession of the premises within 30 days. I dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. I thought to myself, tenancy? We were tenants? For 5 years. Mark had told me this house was ours. Arthur had given us the keys at our wedding reception. He had made a toast. He had said, a proper home for a proper family. I had planted hydrangeas in the front yard. I had painted the nursery. I thought we owned the walls that sheltered us. I was wrong. We were just squatters in a rich man's dollhouse. I heard the garage door open. Mark was home early. He had been coming home early a lot lately, his eyes rimmed with red. Smelling of mints, he used to cover the scent of midday scotch. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was already drowning but had not yet realized the water was over his head. Hey, he said, his voice flat. How is she? He nodded toward Bella but did not look at her. We have mail, I said. My voice sounded strange, hollow and metallic. Mark frowned. He saw the papers on the floor. He saw the envelope on the counter. He saw the look on my face. What is it? He asked. Bending down to pick up the eviction notice, he read it. I watched his face transform. Confusion, then shock, then a deep, sickly pallor that turned his skin the color of old parchment. Notice to quit? Mark whispered. This? Xiaoyu Jinghao Ling. 2 hash is greater than this must be a mistake. Dad gave us the house. He did not. Mark, I said, the anger finally beginning to bubble up through the shock. Read it. The owner of record is the trust. We do not own anything. We do not own a single brick. Mark shook his head. A frantic, denial-fueled motion. No. We signed the papers at the closing. I remember signing them. You signed what they put in front of you. I said, my voice rising. Did you read them? Did you actually read the deed? Mark? Or did you just trust him? Mark stared at the paper, his hands shaking so hard, the paper rattled. He dropped the eviction notice and saw the other document on the counter. The loan demand? He picked it up. His eyes scanned the lines. $50,000? He asked. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very thin. Mark looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a betrayal that mirrored my own. What is this? Sophie? Why does it say you owe my father $50,000? I gripped the edge of the granite counter. This was it. The secret I had buried was being dug up and laid out on the table like a corpse. It was for the in vitro fertilization. I whispered. Mark stared at me. Wait, 小雨静号令. 2# is greater than we paid for the in vitro fertilization. From our savings? No, I said. We did not have enough savings. Mark, you know that we had $10,000. The clinic wanted 60. You were so stressed. You were losing your hair. You would not ask him. You said you would rather die than ask him for money. So you went behind my back. Mark's voice cracked. You went to him? I wanted a baby. I screamed. The sound startled Bella, and she began to wail. Her cry was high and thin, piercing the tension. I wanted us to be a family. Mark, I signed a loan agreement because I thought once we had the baby, he would forgive it. I thought he would love his grandchild. Mark looked at me with something that looked terrifyingly like disgust. You signed a contract with the devil, he said softly, and you did not tell me. He does not consider her a grandchild. Mark, I spat back, pointing at the crying baby. He considers her a breach of contract. Look at the letter. He is calling the loan because she has Down syndrome. He told me at the hospital. He called her defective. And now he is taking the house because we cannot pay. Mark ran his hands through his hair, pulling at the roots. He paced the kitchen. A caged animal. I have to call him. Mark muttered, I have to. 小雨静号令. 2# is greater than this is insane. He cannot do this. It is illegal. Squatters' rights. 小雨静号令. 2# is greater than something. He pulled out his phone. He dialed his father's number. He put it on speaker. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, a click. This is Arthur Miller. I am unavailable. Please leave a message. Mark ended the call and dialed again. This time, it went straight to voicemail. He is declining me. Mark said, staring at the screen, my own father is sending me to voicemail while he evicts us. Call the firm. I said, call Henderson. Mark dialed the lawyer's number. This time, a receptionist answered. Henderson, Blackwood and Associates. This is Mark Miller. Mark barked, trying to sound authoritative, but failing miserably. Put me through to Gerald Henderson. Now, 1 moment, please. Musak played, a cheerful, light jazz tune that felt like a mockery. Then, the smooth, oily voice of the family lawyer came on the line. Mark, Gerald Henderson said, I assume you received the package. Jerry? What the hell is this? Mark demanded. Eviction? You guys drew up the deed 5 years ago. Actually, Mark, Henderson said, his voice calm and professional. We drew up a lease agreement with an option to purchase. An option that was never exercised. The title remains with the trust. Arthur instructed me to enforce the termination clause. Why? Mark shouted. Why is he doing this? There was a pause on the other end. A long, heavy pause. Your father feels that the 小雨静号令 2# is greater than current family arrangement. 小雨静号令 2# is greater than is no longer yielding a positive return. Henderson said carefully. He mentioned a breach of trust regarding a personal loan with your wife. And, frankly, Mark, he is disappointed in the direction of your lineage. My lineage? Mark whispered. He wants you to vacate by the 1st of the month. Henderson continued. If you do not, the sheriff will be involved. And Mark? What? Mark breathed. He suggests you find separate living arrangements. He mentioned that he might be amenable to helping you personally, should you decide to. Sao Yu Ting Ho Ling. 2 hash is greater than restructure your domestic situation. But the offer does not extend to Sophie or the child. The line went dead. Mark lowered the phone slowly. He looked at me. I saw the wheels turning in his head. I saw the calculation. For a split second, just a fraction of a second, I saw him consider it. I saw him think about the warm, safe life he could have if he just cut us loose. If he just abandoned the defective parts of his life. It was a fleeting look, gone as quickly as it came, replaced by horror, but I saw it. And once you see that look in your husband's eyes, you can never unsee it. He wants me to leave you, Mark said, his voice hollow. I walked over to the high chair and picked up Bella. She was still crying, her face red and wet. I rocked her, pressing her face into my shoulder so she would not see her father looking at us like we were anchors dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. We have 48 hours to find $50,000, I said coldly, and 30 days to find a roof. I do not have $50,000, Mark said. You know I do not. He pays me a salary that barely covers the taxes on this place. Then we sell things, I said. We sell the cars. We sell my jewelry. We sell the furniture. It will not be enough, Mark said, sinking onto a kitchen stool. Then we fight. I said, fight? Mark laughed. A dry, bitter sound. You do not fight Arthur Miller. Sophie, you survive him, or you do not. He looked around the kitchen, at the granite countertops, the Viking stove, the trappings of a wealth that was never ours. He set us up, Mark whispered. From the very beginning, he kept the deed. He loaned you the money. He waited. He waited for us to fail so he could crush us. I looked at the eviction notice lying on the floor. He did not just wait for us to fail. Mark, I said softly. He ensured it. I carried Bella out of the kitchen, leaving my husband sitting alone in the wreckage of his inheritance. I walked up the grand staircase, my hand sliding along the polished banister. I went into the nursery. I looked at the crib, the mobile with the spinning lambs, the mural of the enchanted forest I had painted myself. I started packing. Not my clothes, not Mark's suits. I packed Bella's things, the diapers, the formula, the soft blankets, because I knew, with a clarity that cut through the panic, that this house was no longer a home. It was a battlefield, and we had just lost the first skirmish. I walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling lawn, the manicured hedges, the long driveway that led to the iron gates. I saw a black car parked just outside the gate. It was too far away to see the driver, but I knew he was watching. Arthur, he wanted to see us panic. He wanted to see us break. I placed my hand against the cold glass. I thought to myself, you want a show, Arthur? You want to see the weak little girl crumble? You made a mistake. You forgot one variable in your equation. You forgot that a mother with a wounded child is not a victim. She is a weapon. You took my home. You insulted my daughter. You turned my husband against me. Fine. Take the house. Take the money. But you will never take her. And one day, old man, I will make you pay for every single tear she sheds. I will burn your legacy to the ground, and I will use your own money to buy the matches. I turned away from the window. I had work to do. The radiator in the corner of the living room hissed like a dying snake. It was the only sound in the apartment, other than the rhythmic dripping of the kitchen faucet that the landlord had promised to fix 3 months ago. We were living in Bridgeport now, not the redeveloped, artistic section near the water where young professionals walk their French bulldogs. We were on the outskirts, in a complex of beige brick buildings that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke. It was only 15 miles from Arthur's estate in Greenwich, but it might as well have been on a different planet. The fall from grace is not a straight line. It is a spiral. You think you hit the bottom when the moving truck pulls away, but then the floor gives way again, and you fall further. I looked around the room. Our furniture, the few pieces we had managed to keep, looked ridiculous here. The velvet armchair I had upholstered with Italian fabric was jammed against a wall with peeling paint. The antique mirror, a wedding gift from my aunt, reflected a room that was too small, too dark, and too cold. Mark was late. Again, he had found a job as a junior accountant at a logistics firm. It paid a fraction of his salary at Arthur's company. He left the apartment at 6 in the morning and came home long after the streetlights flickered on. His eyes dull and rimmed with red. He had stopped wearing his expensive suits because we could not afford the dry cleaning. Now, he wore wrinkled button-downs and slacks that were beginning to fray at the cuffs. I walked to the window and looked down at the parking lot. My charcoal gray sport utility vehicle was gone, sold to pay off the legal fees from our failed attempt to fight the eviction. In its place sat a rusted sedan with a dented bumper. I used to define myself by what I had. Now, I defined myself by what I had lost. But looking at that rusted car, I did not feel pride or shame. I felt exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that made my limbs feel like lead. I was 39 years old, and I felt 80. I was tired of counting pennies at the grocery store. I was tired of pretending to be brave for Mark. But mostly, I was tired of the anger. It sat in my chest like a hot coal, burning me from the inside out. Bella coughed in the other room, a wet, rattling sound. I rushed to her. She was sitting in her playpen, her face flushed. At 6 months old, she had been small. Now, at nearly a year old, she was still tiny, her immune system fragile. The dampness of this apartment was poisoning her. I picked her up, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. Another fever. That meant another doctor's visit. Another copay we could not afford. The phone rang. It was the landline. We had cut our cell phone plans to the bare minimum, so we kept the landline for emergencies. I stared at the caller ID. Miller Residence. It was not Arthur. It was the main house line. I debated letting it ring, but a treacherous part of me, the part that still craved approval, the part that missed the warmth of a family, made me pick it up. "Hello?" I answered, my voice guarded. "Sophie, is that you?" It was Evelyn, my mother-in-law. Her voice was soft, trembling, laced with the kind of performative sorrow that wealthy women perfect over cocktails. "Hello, Evelyn," I said. "Oh, Sophie." She sighed. "I have been so worried. I heard you are living in Sautinghalling. 2 hash is greater than Bridgeport? Is it safe there?" "It is fine." "Evelyn," I lead. "Why are you calling?" "I just wanted to hear your voice," she said. "I miss you. We all do. The house is so quiet without Mark. And Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than without the baby. I tightened my grip on the receiver. You called her a defect. Evelyn, you stood there and let Arthur throw us out. I know. She wept softly. Arthur is Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2 dièse est supérieur à difficult. You know how he is. He is a man of principle. He feels betrayed. Sophie, he feels like you lied to him about the loan. I did not lie. I said, my voice rising, I borrowed money to give him a grandchild, but you did not tell Mark. Did you? Evelyn countered, her voice dropping to a whisper. That was wrong. Sophie, a wife should not keep secrets. It destroys the trust. Arthur says that is the root of the problem. Your dishonesty. There it was. The twist, the subtle shift of blame. She was not calling to apologize. She was calling to plant seeds of doubt, to make me feel like the villain in my own tragedy. And God help me. It was working. Had I been wrong? Was I the reason my husband was working himself to death in a cubicle? Was I the reason my daughter was sleeping in a drafty room? If you just apologized, Evelyn said, her voice dripping with false hope. If you came to him, Sophie, alone, if you told him you were wrong, if you admitted that you were selfish to keep the baby when you knew, Sao Jing Hao Ling, 2# is greater than well. When you knew the situation, he might help. He mentioned a trust fund for Mark. He wants to help Mark. He hates seeing his son suffer because of Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than your choices. My choices? I whispered. You are a mother. Sophie. Evelyn pressed. Do you not want what is best for your husband? Do you not want him to have his life back? Or are you going to keep dragging him down just to prove a point? You are ruining him. Sophie. I looked at the door as Mark walked in. He looked gray. He slumped against the doorframe, closing his eyes for a moment before opening them to look at me. He looked broken. Evelyn was right. I was ruining him. Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than I have to go. I stammered. Think about it. Dear, Evelyn said, be a good wife. Fix this. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. Who was that? Mark asked, loosening his tie. No one. I said, just a telemarketer. I lied to him again. The poison was in my veins now. I looked at Mark, and I did not see my partner. I saw a victim of my own stubbornness. Maybe I was the monster. Maybe Arthur was right. Maybe I was just a woman who had signed a bad contract and was refusing to pay the price. Time has a way of blurring the edges of pain, turning sharp agony into a dull, constant ache. 5 years passed. 5 years of radiators hissing. 5 years of coupon clipping. 5 years of watching Bella grow into a sweet, stumbling, joyous child who loved music and bright colors. Even if she could not speak in full sentences yet, we survived. We did not thrive. We existed. Mark had aged 10 years in 5. His hair was gray at the temples. The spark in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a flat resignation. We rarely spoke about the past. We rarely spoke about the future. We lived in the tyranny of the present. Then came the letter. It was not from Arthur. It was from a cousin of Mark's, a distant relative who liked to gossip. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a pile of medical bills. Bella was on the floor, drawing with crayons. She was 5 years old now. She looked up at me and smiled, a wide, gummy smile that lit up the room. Mama, look. Son, she said, pointing to a yellow blob on the paper. Beautiful, baby. I said, forcing a smile. Mark walked in. He held a letter in his hand. He looked strange, not tired, not angry. He looked Saoyuting Holing. 2# is greater than shocked. What is it? I asked. He sat down across from me. He placed the letter on the table. Karen is gone, he said. Gone? Like Saoyuting Holing. 2# is greater than dead? No, Mark said. Gone. She left the country. I frowned. What do you mean? She met a man, Mark said, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and dark amusement. A French developer, or so she said. She married him 3 months ago in secret. Last week, she liquidated her assets. I stared at him. She sold the jewelry. Mark continued. She sold the summer house Arthur put in her name. She emptied the joint accounts she had access to for household management. And she took Kevin. She took the heir? I asked, the irony thick on my tongue. She took the heir. Mark said, they are in Zurich, or maybe Monaco. No one knows. She left a note for Dad. She said she was tired of waiting for him to die. Silence filled the kitchen. I looked at the peeling paint on the walls. I looked at the medical bills. And then a sound bubbled up in my throat. A laugh. A harsh, barking laugh that I could not control. Arthur, the great strategist, the man who treated family like a business portfolio, had been liquidated by his own daughter. She robbed him? I asked, wiping a tear from my eye, blind. Mark said, she stripped the accounts. He gave her power of attorney last year because he was having mini strokes and did not trust anyone else. He thought she was the loyal one. He thought Kevin was the golden future. And now? I asked. Now he is alone. Mark said, Mom died 2 years ago. We did not even go to the funeral because he hired security to keep us out. Karen is gone. Kevin is gone. Mark looked out the window at the parking lot. He is all alone in that big house. Mark whispered, just him and the silence. I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it made me dizzy. It was karma. It was poetic justice written in bold letters. The man who had discarded us for being defective had been cannibalized by the perfect family he had cultivated. But then, Mark looked at me, and the look in his eyes chilled me. He called me. Mark said softly. My laughter stopped. When? Today. At work. And? I demanded. What did he say? Did he apologize? Did he beg for forgiveness? No. Mark said. He does not know how to apologize. Sophie, you know that. Then what did he want? He invited us to Thanksgiving. Mark said. I slammed my hand down on the table. No, absolutely not. He sounded Saoyuting Haoling. Too old. Sophie, Mark said, his voice pleading. He sounded scared. He said he wants to see the family. He said he wants to see Bella. He called her a liability. I screamed. He called her defective. He threw us out on the street. I know, Mark shouted back. I know what he did, but he is my father, and he is 80 years old, and he just lost everything he thought he had. He did not lose everything, I said coldly. He drove it away. Mark put his head in his hands. I am not going, I said, and Bella is certainly not going. Mark did not answer. He just sat there, breathing heavily. I looked at my husband, and I saw the weakness again. The desperate need for Daddy's approval that 5 years of poverty had not erased. He wanted to go back. He wanted to believe that the monster had changed. But I knew better. Monsters do not change. They just get hungry. But then, my eyes drifted back to the pile of bills on the table. Specifically, the letter from the specialist telling us that Bella needed heart surgery within the next year to correct a valve defect. A surgery that cost $100,000. A surgery insurance would only partially cover. We did not have the money. We were drowning. I looked at Bella, drawing her yellow sun. If we went, Saoyuting Haling, 2 is greater than if we just went to dinner. Saoyuting Haling, Jinghao Dayu. Arthur was vulnerable now. He was desperate. He had no hair. Karen had taken the fake prince away. That left a vacancy. A dangerous, seductive thought curled around my heart like a vine. What if we could get back what was stolen from us? Not for Mark, not for me, but for her. I reached out and covered Mark's hand with mine. Mark looked up, surprised by the touch. Tell me exactly what he said. I whispered. Mark swallowed. He said, Saoyuting Haoling, 2 is greater than he said. He has been thinking about the future. He said it is time to settle accounts. I looked at the yellow sun Bella had drawn. It was bright and hopeful. Settle accounts, I repeated. I stood up and walked to the fridge. I opened it and stared at the half-empty carton of milk. Call him back, I said, without turning around. Sophie? Mark asked, shocked. Call him back, I said, my voice hard as steel. Tell him we will come. But, Saoyuting Haoling, 2 is greater than you said. Saoyuting Haoling, Jinghao Dayu. I know what I said, I interrupted, turning to face him. My face was calm. But inside, a dam had broken. I was done being the victim. I was done being the poor relation. Karen had struck the first blow. I would strike the last. Tell him we will be there, I said, and tell him to have the checkbook ready. The dress I chose for Bella was a deep crimson velvet with a white lace collar. I had found it at a consignment shop in Fairfield, buried under a pile of denim overalls. It had smelled of mothballs and someone else's memories. But after 3 washes and a generous amount of lavender spray, it looked respectable. It looked like money, or at least a convincing forgery of it. I buttoned the back of the dress, my fingers cold and stiff. Bella stood patiently on the bathroom stool, humming a tune from a cartoon she watched on repeat. She was 5 years old now. Her hair was fine and soft, the color of spun gold, pulled back into 2 neat braids. She looked at me in the mirror, her almond-shaped eyes wide and trusting. You look like a princess, I whispered, smoothing the velvet over her shoulders. Princess, Bella repeated, touching the lace. Grandma? My heart stuttered. She was asking about Evelyn. We had never told her that her grandmother was dead. We had never told her that her grandmother had died despising her. No, baby, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. We are going to see Grandpa Arthur. Grandpa. She tested the word. It was foreign on her tongue. Mark was standing in the doorway. He was wearing his only remaining good suit, a navy blue wool that was slightly tight around the waist now. He had polished his shoes until they gleamed, but he could not polish away the terror in his eyes. We do not have to do this. Sophie, Mark said. His voice was low, vibrating with a frantic energy. We can call him. We can say the car broke down. We can say Bella is sick. We are going, I said, turning Bella around to face him. Look at her. Mark, look at your daughter. She needs surgery. Real surgery. Not the kind covered by state insurance, with a 6-month waiting list and a surgeon who is awake for 30 hours straight. She needs the best. Mark looked at Bella. He flinched, as if her innocence was a bright light that hurt his eyes. "He will hurt her," Mark whispered. "He will say something cruel. I know him. Sophie, he is not doing this because he misses us. He is doing this because he is bored and he wants a target. Let him talk," I said, picking up a hairbrush to smooth a stray lock of Bella's hair. "Words are air. Mark, they cannot hurt us anymore. We have been poor. We have been hungry. We have been humiliated by landlords and bill collectors. You think an old man's insults are going to break me now? It is not about you," Mark said. "It is about her." I stopped brushing. I looked at my husband in the mirror. "Everything I do is for her," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was colder than the drafty bathroom. "If I have to walk into hell and shake the devil's hand to get the money to fix her heart, I will do it. And I will smile while I do it." I saw Mark recoil. He did not recognize me. Good. I barely recognized myself. The soft, artistic interior designer who cried over romantic comedies was dead. She had died the day the eviction notice was pasted to our door. In her place was a woman who calculated the exchange rate between dignity and survival. I looked at my reflection. My lipstick was a shade darker than usual. Armor, war paint. I was not going to a family reunion. I was going to a negotiation. The drive to Greenwich was a journey through time. As we left the cracked pavement of Bridgeport and crossed the invisible border into the Gold Coast, the world changed. The houses grew larger, pushing back the trees. The fences became higher, wrought iron replacing chain link. The cars passing us were sleek German machines that cost more than our annual income. Our rusted sedan rattled as we turned onto the long, winding driveway of the estate. The gravel crunched beneath our tires, a sound that used to signal home, but now sounded like bones breaking. The house loomed ahead. It was a Georgian monstrosity of red brick and white pillars. It looked neglected. The ivy had grown wild, choking the windows on the second floor. The fountain in the center of the circular driveway was dry, filled with dead leaves. Arthur's kingdom was crumbling. Mark parked the car. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "I cannot," he breathed. "Get out of the car." "Mark," I commanded. He looked at me, pleading, "Get out." I repeated, "Open the door for your daughter." We walked up the stone steps. I held Bella's hand tightly. Her palm was warm and slightly sticky. It was the only real thing in this entire landscape. I rang the bell. There was no maid, no butler. The door creaked open, and there stood Arthur. He was smaller than I remembered. The titan of industry who had terrorized our lives had shrunk inside his cashmere cardigan. He leaned heavily on a cane with a silver handle. His face was a map of deep lines and age spots. But his eyes, 少于金浩林, 2 hashes greater than his eyes were the same. Blue, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. They flicked over Mark, dismissing him instantly. They landed on me, assessing my cheap coat and my defiant stance. Then they traveled down to Bella. The air seemed to freeze. Arthur stared at the child he had called a defective product. Bella stared back, clutching a small stuffed rabbit I had allowed her to bring for comfort. "Grandpa?" Bella chirped. Arthur's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile, or it might have been a grimace of pain. "Come in," he rasped. "It is cold. You are letting the heat out." We stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of dust and lemon oil, but underneath, there was the sour scent of old age and neglect. The furniture was covered in white sheets, like ghosts waiting for a party that would never happen. Only the path to the dining room was clear. Karen took the silver, Arthur said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. She took the paintings too, left the frames. Can you believe that? She cut the canvases out and left the frames on the wall. He gestured with his cane to the empty rectangles hanging in the hallway. It was a violent image. She is a thief, Mark muttered, finding his voice. She is practical, Arthur corrected him. She saw a sinking ship and she grabbed the lifeboats. I taught her that. I just did not expect her to leave me to drown. He turned and began to shuffle toward the dining room. Come, he said. Cook prepared dinner before she left for the night. I do not keep staff overnight anymore. Too many prying eyes. We followed him. The dining room table was set for 4. The china was the good set, the royal Doulton with the gold rim. There was a turkey in the center, looking dry and somewhat pathetic in the vastness of the room. Sit, Arthur commanded. He sat at the head of the table. Mark took the seat to his right. I sat to his left, placing Bella between us. I wanted her within arm's reach. Arthur poured wine for himself and Mark. He did not offer me any. So, Arthur said, cutting into a slice of meat with a trembling hand. You came. You invited us, Mark said stiffly. I did. Arthur nodded. I was curious. I wanted to see if 5 years of squalor had taught you anything about value. Mark flinched. I sat perfectly still. We are doing fine. Arthur, I said calmly. Fine? Arthur chuckled. A wet, rattling sound. I have my sources. Sophie, I know about the apartment in Bridgeport. I know about the car that sounds like a lawnmower. I know about the medical bills. He pointed his fork at Bella. I know about the heart, he said. My blood ran cold. He had been watching us, stalking us. The valve is leaking. Is it not? Arthur said, taking a sip of wine. Expensive fix. $100,000. Maybe more with complications. How do you know that? Mark demanded, standing up halfway. Sit down. Mark, Arthur snapped. The old authority cracked like a whip, and Mark dropped back into his chair instinctively. I know because I own the hospital network. You idiot, Arthur sneered. I see the reports. I see the debt collection notices. He turned his gaze to me. You are drowning. Sophie, you are pretending to swim, but I can see the water in your lungs. I wanted to grab the carving knife and plunge it into his chest. The rage was white hot, blinding, but then I looked at Bella. She was trying to cut a dinner roll with her spoon, her tongue poking out in concentration. If I killed him, I went to prison, and she died. If I listened, maybe she lived. It was a simple equation, the math of survival. What do you want, Arthur? I asked. My voice was devoid of emotion. I sounded just like him. Arthur smiled. It was a gruesome expression. I want to make a deal, he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He placed it on the table next to the wine glass. I have realized something, Arthur said, looking at the empty chair where Karen used to sit. Legacy is not about affection. It is about continuity. Karen was smart, but she was greedy. She wanted the money, but she did not want the name. She took Kevin and changed his last name to that of her new husband. Can you imagine? My money, supporting another man's name. He spat on the floor, actually spat on the Persian rug. So that leaves you. Mark, Arthur said. You are weak, you are soft, but you are a miller. He opened the checkbook. I am prepared to fully fund the medical procedures for the child, Arthur said. Not just the surgery, the therapy, the special schooling. Everything. I will set up a trust fund. $2 million. Irrevocable. $2 million. The number hung in the air, shimmering like a mirage. Mark looked at his father, his mouth open. Dad, Mark choked out. You, Soyuting Haling. 2 hashes greater than you would do that? Arthur held up a hand. I am not finished, he said. He turned his eyes to me. They were cold. Dead sharks, that is the payment. Arthur said, now for the price. I knew it was coming. I braced myself. The money is for the child's maintenance. Arthur said, but the Miller legacy needs a viable heir. A healthy, male heir. Someone who can run the empire when I am gone. He looked at Mark. You are still young enough. Mark, you can still produce, but not with her. He pointed a bony finger at me. Her stock is tainted, Arthur said plainly. She produced a defect. We cannot risk a second failure. I felt Mark stiffen beside me. What are you saying? Mark whispered. I have found a woman. Arthur said, the daughter of an associate. Young, healthy, proven genetics. She is willing. You want me to. So Yutsing Haling. 2 hash is greater than cheat on Sophie? Mark asked, horrified. No, Arthur said. I want you to divorce her. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Bella stopped playing with her role. You will divorce Sophie. Arthur continued, as if discussing a zoning permit. You will marry the woman I have selected. You will produce a male heir. In exchange, Sophie gets the $2 million for the defective child. She walks away. You stay. The line continues. Mark stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. You are insane. Mark said, you are actually evil. Come on. Sophie, we are leaving. Mark reached for my hand. I did not move. Sophie? Mark said. Sophie, get up. I stared at the checkbook. $2 million. $2 million meant Bella would live. $2 million meant she would never be cold again. $2 million meant she would have the best doctors, the best teachers, a life of safety and comfort, and all I had to do was lose my husband. Was Mark worth $2 million? Was my marriage worth my daughter's life? I looked up at Arthur. He was watching me with intense fascination. He knew exactly which button to press. He knew that a mother's love is not just soft and warm. It is fierce and transactional when it needs to be. Sophie, Mark shouted, what are you doing? Get up. I turned to look at Mark. I saw the fear in his eyes. He was not afraid of his father anymore. He was afraid of me. He is offering $2 million. Mark, I said softly. So what? Mark screamed. He wants me to leave you. He wants to breed me like a stud horse. It is for Bella, I said. Mark stared at me. He looked like I had slapped him. You are considering it, he whispered. You are actually considering it. I was not just considering it. I was calculating it. If I took the money, I could take Bella away. I could leave this toxic state. I could start over. Yes, I would lose Mark, but Mark was weak. Mark had let us drown for 5 years. The money, Soyuting Haoling. 2 hash is greater than the money was strong. The money was safety. I am just saying, Soyuting Haoling. 2 hash is greater than we should listen. I said. Mark recoiled from me. He looked at me with pure revulsion. You are just like him. Mark spat. You are exactly like him. No, Arthur interrupted, his voice gleeful. She is smarter than you. Mark, she understands the market. Arthur picked up a pen. What do you say? Sophie? Arthur asked. Do we have a deal? $2 million for the child. You sign the divorce papers tomorrow. I looked at the pen. I looked at Bella, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. I reached out my hand. I did not reach for Mark. I reached toward the checkbook. Saluting Howling. 2# is greater than I want to see the terms, I said. Mark let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. Do not touch it, Mark yelled. He grabbed my arm, yanking me back. Get your hands off her, Arthur barked. It was chaos. The veneer of civility shattered. We were not a family dining at a table. We were wolves fighting over a carcass. And in that moment, I realized I had crossed the line. I had stepped over the edge of the cliff. I had been willing to sell my marriage for security. I had become the thing I hated. But before I could pull my hand back, before I could apologize, before I could wake up from the trance of greed, the world exploded. Arthur clutched his chest. His face turned a violent shade of purple. He gasped, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. My pills. Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling. 2# is greater than he choked out. My Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling. 2# is greater than pills. Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling. Ting Hao Dai. He slumped forward, his face landing in the mashed potatoes. The wine glass tipped over, spilling red liquid across the white tablecloth like a pool of blood. Dad, Mark screamed. The point of no return had been crossed, but not in the way any of us expected. The dining room descended into immediate, suffocating chaos. The silence that had reigned only moments ago was replaced by the guttural sounds of Mark's panic and the wet, wheezing gasps coming from Arthur. Mark was on his knees beside his father's chair, his hands hovering uselessly over the old man's back. Arthur was slumped forward, his face smeared with the starchy white of the mashed potatoes, his left hand clawing at the tablecloth, pulling the fine linen until the silver candlesticks wobbled dangerously. Call 911, Mark screamed at me. Sophie, do it now. I sat, frozen. My hand was still outstretched, hovering over the checkbook that lay on the table. The checkbook that promised salvation. The checkbook that had almost bought my soul. I looked at Arthur. His eyes were squeezed shut, his face a mask of agony. But there was something wrong. The rhythm of his breathing was too theatrical. The clutch of his hand was too strong for a man whose heart was allegedly failing. A dark, cold thought uncoiled in the back of my mind like a snake. Let him die. If he dies right now, before he signs the divorce papers, but after he admitted to the trust fund, Sao Yu Ting Hao Ling, 2# is greater than maybe we win. Maybe the nightmare ends. I watched my husband weeping over the monster, and I felt nothing but a chilling calculation. Am I evil? Or have I just been taught by the best? My pills, Arthur choked out, spittle flying from his lips. Upstairs, Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling, 2# is greater than master bath. Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling, 2# is greater than top drawer. Nitroglycerin. I will get them, Mark yelled. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his chair backward. No, Arthur wheezed, grabbing Mark's wrist with a grip that looked surprisingly firm. You, Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling, 2# is greater than get the car. Bring it. Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling, 2 is groter dan to the door. Hospital, faster. But the ambulance. Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling, 2, Mark stammered. Faster, Arthur roared. A burst of energy that seemed impossible for a dying man. Get the car, Sophie. Sao Yu Ting Ha Ling, 2# is greater than get the pills. Mark did not think. He had spent 40 years obeying that voice. It was a reflex, conditioned into his bones. He turned and sprinted out of the dining room, his footsteps heavy and frantic on the hardwood floor of the hallway. The front door slammed shut, shaking the crystal chandelier above us. Suddenly, the room was quiet. It was just me, Bella, and Arthur. Bella had slid off her chair. She was frightened by the shouting. She was clutching her stuffed rabbit, backing away from the table, her eyes wide and watery. I stood up slowly. I looked at Arthur. He was still slumped over, his breathing ragged. I should go upstairs, I said, my voice flat, to get the pills. Arthur groaned, waving a hand vaguely toward the ceiling. I did not move toward the stairs. I moved toward Bella. I wanted to get her out of the room. I did not trust him. Even dying, I did not trust him. Bella, come here, I whispered, but Bella was distracted. In her retreat from the table, she had backed into the corner of the room where a tall, rosewood pedestal stood. On top of it sat a vase. It was a Qing dynasty porcelain piece, blue and white, depicting dragons chasing a pearl. Arthur had bought it at an auction in London 10 years ago. I remembered him bragging that it cost more than the average American earned in a decade. Bella reached out. She liked the dragons. She liked the shiny surface. Pretty, she murmured, her small fingers brushing the ceramic. Do not touch that. The voice did not sound like a dying man. It was sharp, clear, booming. I whipped my head around. Arthur was sitting up. The wheezing had stopped. The agony had vanished from his face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He was not gasping for air. He was staring at Bella with the eyes of a wolf watching a lamb disturb its den. Arthur, I whispered. He ignored me. He saw Bella's hand grasp the neck of the vase. The heavy porcelain wobbled on the pedestal. No, Arthur shouted. He launched himself from the chair. He did not stumble. He did not clutch his chest. He moved with a speed and agility that betrayed every lie he had told us about his frailty. He lunged across the few feet of space separating him from his granddaughter. It happened in slow motion. Arthur reached out, not to catch the vase, but to remove the threat. He shoved Bella. He did not gently move her aside. He shoved her, a hard, violent push against her small chest. Bella was 5 years old. She had low muscle tone. She had poor balance. She did not stand a chance. She flew backward. Her feet tangled in the edge of the Persian rug. She fell hard, her head cracking against the wainscoting of the wall with a sickening thud. The vibration of the shove did exactly what Arthur had tried to prevent. The pedestal tipped. The blue and white vase teetered, surrendered to gravity, and crashed to the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain was like a gunshot. Shards of history and wealth exploded across the room. Bella screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek of pain and terror. Arthur stood over the wreckage, his chest heaving. He was not looking at the child curling up on the floor. He was looking at the ceramic shards. You stupid creature, Arthur bellowed, his face turning red, not from a heart attack, but from rage. Look what you did. Do you have any idea what this was worth? He kicked a piece of the porcelain toward Bella. It is worth more than you, Arthur screamed at the crying child. It is worth more than your entire worthless existence. I stood frozen, my brain unable to process the horror of what I was seeing. He was healthy. He had faked it. He had faked the heart attack to separate Mark and me, to create chaos. And now, he was standing over my injured daughter, mourning a vase. The scream inside me finally broke free. Get away from her, I shrieked. I threw myself across the room, sliding on the polished floor, Placing my body between Arthur and Bella, I gathered her into my arms. She was sobbing, clutching her head. I felt a warm, sticky wetness on my palm. Blood. She was bleeding. "You monster," I hissed, looking up at him. "You touched her." "She broke it," Arthur spat, pointing a shaking finger at the debris. "She is a menace. I told you she was defective. She destroys everything she touches." The front door opened. Footsteps ran down the hall. "Dad, I got the car." Mark skidded to a halt in the doorway. He was panting, his face pale with worry, his car keys clutched in his hand. He froze. He saw the scene. He saw the broken vase. He saw Bella crying in my arms, blood matting her blonde hair. And he saw his father. Arthur was standing tall. He was not slumped. He was not wheezing. He was standing over us, his face twisted in a snarl, his fists clenched. Mark looked at his father. Then he looked at the pills Arthur had claimed he needed to survive, which were still upstairs in a drawer. "You, Saoting Haoling, 2# is greater than," Mark whispered. "You are standing up." Arthur turned to look at his son. He realized his mistake. He tried to hunch over, tried to grab his chest again, to reclaim the performance, the shock. Arthur stammered, his voice wavering unconvincingly. "The shock. Saoting Haoling. Coxie. It. Saoting Haoling. 2# is greater than the adrenaline. Saoting Haoling. Jing Hao Da Yu." Mark dropped the car keys. They clattered on the floor, sounding like coins falling into a wishing well that had run dry. "You pushed her," I said, my voice trembling with a deadly calm. "Mark." He shoved her into the wall because she touched the vase. Mark looked at Bella. He saw the blood. "He shoved her?" Mark asked, his voice barely audible. Arthur straightened up, abandoning the ruse. His ego was too big to pretend to be weak when he felt righteous. "She broke the Ming vase." "Mark," Arthur snapped, gesturing at the shards. $200,000. Gone, because you cannot control your animal. Mark stared at his father. For the first time in 40 years, the fog in his eyes cleared. He did not see the patriarch. He did not see the provider. He did not see the god of his small universe. He saw a man who valued painted clay over flesh and blood. He faked the heart attack. "Mark," I said, pressing my hand against Bella's wound to staunch the bleeding. "He faked it to get you out of the room so he could manipulate me. And then he hurt your daughter." Mark took a step forward. "Dad," Mark said, "is that true?" Arthur sneered. He adjusted his cuffs, regaining his composure. "I did what was necessary," Arthur said coldly. "I was trying to save this family from its own stupidity. And look what happened. The moment I turn my back, the retard breaks." "Stop." Mark did not shout. He just said the word, but it was heavy. It carried the weight of 5 years of poverty, 5 years of humiliation, and a lifetime of silence. "Do not call her that," Mark said. Arthur laughed. "A cruel, dismissive bark. It is what she is." "Mark, face reality. She's broken, just like that vase, except the vase had value." Mark moved. He did not run. He walked straight up to his father. Mark was 6 feet tall. Arthur was old and shrinking. For the first time, Mark towered over him. "You are the one who is broken," Mark said. He looked down at the checkbook still lying on the table. "The $2 million. The bribe. Keep your money," Mark whispered. "Keep your house. Keep your vase." Mark turned to me. "Sophie, get her up. We are going to the hospital." I struggled to my feet, lifting Bella. She was heavy, dead weight in her trauma, burying her face in my neck. Arthur realized he was losing control. The one thing he feared more than losing money was losing control. "If you walk out that door," Arthur shouted, his face turning purple again, this time for real, "you get nothing. I will write you out of the will tonight. I will burn the money before I give it to you. You will starve in that ghetto apartment." Mark stopped at the doorway. He turned back. He looked at the old man, standing amidst the ruins of his precious porcelain. "We are already starving, Dad," Mark said softly, "but at least we are not eating our own young." Mark put his arm around me and Bella. He ushered us out of the dining room, away from the smell of the cold turkey and the spilled wine. We walked out of the front door into the cold November night. The wind bit at our faces. Behind us, in the mansion, we heard a sound. It was Arthur screaming. He was smashing things. We heard glass breaking. We heard wood splintering. The king was destroying his own castle because his subjects had finally refused to bow. "Get in the car," Mark said, opening the door for me. His hands were steady. I looked at him. He was not the boy I had married. He was not the beaten-down accountant. He was a father, finally. But as I buckled Bella in, listening to her whimper, I looked back at the house one last time. Mark might have been done. He might have found his moral high ground. But I was not done. Arthur had drawn blood, my daughter's blood, and as the car pulled away, leaving the estate behind, I knew that walking away was not enough. Justice was not enough. I did not want him to just be alone. I wanted him to be destroyed. The emergency room at Greenwich Hospital was less like a medical facility and more like a hotel lobby where people occasionally bled. The lighting was soft. The floors were polished terrazzo, and the air smelled of antiseptic and expensive coffee. I sat on a vinyl chair that squeaked every time I shifted my weight. My coat was stained with my daughter's blood. It had dried now, turning a dark, rusty brown that looked stark against the cheap fabric. Bella was behind the curtain in exam room 3. They were stitching the gash on her forehead. 6 stitches. The doctor had been kind, but his eyes were cold, scanning us with the practiced suspicion of a man who is legally required to report non-accidental injuries. Mark sat next to me, his head in his hands. He had stopped shaking. Now, he was just a statue of misery. We had escaped the house, but we had not escaped Arthur. I could feel his reach even here, miles away. A police officer walked through the automatic doors. He was not rushing. He adjusted his belt, scanned the room, and walked straight toward the nurse's station. He spoke to the receptionist, who pointed a manicured finger in our direction. "Here it comes," I whispered. Mark looked up. He saw the uniform. "I will talk to him," Mark said. Standing up, "I will tell him everything. I will file an assault charge. Sit down." "Mark," I said softly. "Why?" He pushed her. "Sophie, because look at who the officer is." I said, "It was Officer Miller. No relation. But he did security detail for Arthur's annual garden parties. He had probably eaten Arthur's shrimp and laughed at Arthur's jokes while earning triple overtime." The officer walked over to us. He did not take off his hat. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller?" he asked. "Yes," Mark said, stepping forward. "Officer, I want to report an incident. My father, Arthur Miller, he..." "Hold on," the officer interrupted, raising a thick hand. "I have just come from the estate. I took a statement from Mr. Miller Sr. He pushed my daughter," Mark said, his voice rising. "She is 5 years old. He shoved her into a wall. That is not what the report says, the officer said. His tone was bored, bureaucratic. Mr. Miller stated that there was a domestic dispute during dinner. He claims you were intoxicated. Mark, he claims you became violent when he refused to give you a loan. He says the child was caught in the crossfire of your temper tantrum. My mouth fell open. The lie was so bold, so perfectly constructed. It was almost admirable. That is a lie, Mark shouted. People in the waiting room turned to look. Lower your voice. Sir, the officer warned, his hand drifting to his belt. We have witnesses. The housekeeper was not even there, I interjected. Standing up, she left before dinner. She gave a sworn statement, the officer said, ignoring me. She says she heard shouting. She heard things breaking. She saw Mark storming out, dragging the child. Of course, the invisible housekeeper, the payroll witness. Arthur had been busy while we were driving to the hospital. He had not just been smashing furniture. He had been building a narrative. He was painting Mark as the drunken, desperate failure who hurt his own child in a fit of rage. It was brilliant. It was evil. And in this town, where money was the only god people prayed to, it was going to work. So what happens now? I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. Are you arresting us? Not tonight, the officer said, but Child Protective Services has been notified. The room spun. Child Protective Services? Mark whispered. Standard procedure for suspicious injuries involving a minor, especially when alcohol is alleged. The officer said, they will be contacting you for a home visit. Until then, stay away from the estate. If you step foot on Arthur Miller's property, you will be arrested for trespassing. He turned and walked away. Just like that, he did not ask for our side. He did not look at the photos of Bella's head. He delivered the message and left. Mark collapsed back into the chair. He is going to take her, Mark whispered. He is going to use Child Protective Services to take her away from us. He will say we are unfit. He will say we are poor. He will say we are abusive. He will not take her, I said, grabbing Mark's hand. I will kill him first. Do not say that, Mark hissed. They are probably listening. We sat in silence for an hour. The nurse finally came out. She is all done, she said. She was very brave. You can take her home. Home. To the apartment with the peeling paint and the empty fridge. We walked to the parking garage. The concrete structure was cold and dimly lit. Our footsteps echoed in the emptiness. As Mark unlocked the rusted sedan, a shadow detached itself from a concrete pillar. Mark jumped back, putting himself between me and the figure. Stay back, Mark yelled. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller, please. The voice was familiar, smooth, cultured, tired. A man stepped into the pool of yellow light cast by the overhead lamp. He was wearing a trench coat and a fedora, looking like something out of a noir film, but his face was haggard. Gerald Henderson, Arthur's lawyer. What do you want? Mark demanded. Did he send you to serve us papers? Is it the divorce decree? No, Henderson said. He looked around nervously, checking the corners of the garage. He did not send me. He does not know I am here. Then leave, I said, opening the car door. We have nothing to say to you. You are his attack dog. I was his attack dog, Henderson corrected. Until tonight. He walked closer. He looked old. Not the powerful attorney I remembered, but a man who had carried too many secrets for too long. I heard the call, Henderson said. I heard him calling the police chief. I heard him calling the judge. I heard him fabricating the story about you. Mark. And? Mark spat. You are here to gloat? I am here because I have a granddaughter. Henderson said softly. She is about the same age as Bella. And tonight, for the first time in 30 years, I looked at myself in the mirror and I wanted to vomit. He reached into his coat pocket. Mark flinched. But Henderson did not pull out a gun. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. What is that? I asked. Leverage, Henderson said. He handed the envelope to me. It was heavy. Arthur has treated me like a servant for 3 decades, Henderson said, his voice bitter. He ridiculed me. He underpaid me. He held my partnership over my head like a carrot on a stick. But I stayed. I stayed because I thought I was part of something important. He looked at the bandage on Bella's head through the car window. There's nothing important about a man who hurts children, Henderson whispered. Open it, he said to me. I tore open the seal. Inside was a stack of medical records. Old ones. The paper was yellowed. What is this? I asked, scanning the pages. Look at the dates, Henderson said. Look at the blood types. I looked. It was a paternity test result from 5 years ago. Subject, Kevin Patterson. Alleged father, Jean-Luc Patterson. But there was a note attached. A handwritten note in Karen's handwriting. And a second test. I read the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 0%. I looked up at Henderson, confused. Kevin is not Karen's husband's son? Keep reading. Henderson said, look at the genetic markers. I flipped the page. Kevin, Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than Kevin has a genetic condition. I read aloud, cystic fibrosis carrier. And Arthur? Henderson asked. I frowned. I did not know Arthur's medical history in detail. Arthur is O negative. Henderson said, the universal donor, pure blood. He likes to call it. Karen is A positive. Her husband was O positive. So? Mark asked. Impatient. Kevin is AB negative. Henderson said. Mark stopped. He was an accountant. He knew math. But he also knew biology basics. That is impossible. Mark said, 2 O parents cannot make an AB child. And an O and an A cannot make an AB child. Exactly, Henderson said. So who is the father? I asked. Henderson smiled. A thin, grim smile. Karen had a tennis instructor. Henderson said, a Brazilian man. Very athletic. Very. Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than A-type. I stared at the papers. Kevin is not Sao Jing Hao Ling. 2# is greater than I started to say. The realization dawning on me, like the sun rising over a battlefield. Kevin is not a Miller. Henderson said, he does not have a drop of Arthur's blood in his veins. He is a total biological stranger. My hands began to shake. Arthur does not know? Mark whispered. Arthur thinks the sun rises and sets on that boy. Henderson said, he thinks Kevin is the genetic perfection he always wanted. He poured millions into him. He gave Karen everything because of him. And Bella? I asked. Henderson looked at the sleeping child in the car. Bella is the only one. He said, Down syndrome or not, defective or not, Sao Jing Hao Ling, 2# is greater than she is the only biological descendant Arthur Miller has left on this earth. The silence in the parking garage was absolute. This is the nuclear option. Henderson said, if you drop this bomb, it will not just hurt him, it will destroy him. It will invalidate his entire worldview. He has spent 5 years worshipping a fraud and abusing the only real blood he has. Why are you giving this to us? Mark asked. Because he fired me tonight, Henderson said, buttoning his coat. After he called the police, he called me. He told me to draft a new will, leaving everything to a charity for Saoying 2# is greater than eugenics research. He called me a parasite. Henderson turned to walk away. Use it wisely, he said over his shoulder. And Sophie? Yes? I asked. Do not settle for an apology. He does not have a soul left to mean it. Go for the jugular. He disappeared into the shadows. I stood there, holding the envelope. It felt heavier than lead. It felt like a weapon. Mark looked at me. His eyes were wide. We have him, Mark whispered. No, I said, climbing into the car and slamming the door. I looked at the envelope in my lap. We do not just have him, Mark, we own him. I started the engine. The rusted sedan coughed to life. Where are we going? Mark asked. Home? No, I said, shifting the car into gear. My eyes were dry. My heart was a stone. We are going to make a phone call, I said. We are going to call the local news station. We are going to call the papers. Arthur wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to talk about genetics and heritage. I pulled out of the garage, the tires screeching on the concrete. Let us give him a show he will never forget. The court of law requires evidence. A jury of 12 peers. And a unanimous verdict. It is a slow, grinding machine. The court of public opinion, however, requires only a rumor and a smartphone. It is a guillotine, and the blade drops instantly. I did not sleep after we left the hospital. The adrenaline that had surged through me in the parking garage had crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. We sat in our cramped kitchen, the linoleum floor cold beneath my bare feet. On the table lay the manila envelope Henderson had given us. The weapon. Mark was pacing. He looked terrified. Are you sure about this? He asked for the 10th time. Once we do this, Sophie, there is no going back. He will sue us. He will bury us in litigation until we are dead. Let him sue, I said, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. He can sue us for libel if we are lying, but we are not lying. Truth is the absolute defense. I picked up the phone. I did not call the police. I did not call a lawyer. I called Claire Bennett. Claire was a society columnist for the Connecticut Post. She was a woman who had spent 20 years covering Arthur's galas, praising his flower arrangements, and photographing his charity checks. But I knew something about Claire. I knew she hated him. I knew Arthur had once publicly humiliated her husband at a golf tournament, calling him a caddy because he worked in insurance rather than finance. Claire picked up on the second ring. It was 6 a.m. Bennett, she rasped. It is Sophie Miller. I said. There was a pause. Sophie, the exile? I have not heard that name in 5 years. I have a story. Claire, I said, I have a story about a Ming vase. A 5-year-old girl with 6 stitches in her head and a paternity test that is going to turn the Gold Coast upside down. I heard the click of a lighter on the other end. Claire was lighting a cigarette. I am listening, she said. By noon, the story broke. It did not start with the DNA. That was too complex. It started with the violence. Billionaire philanthropist accused of assaulting disabled grandchild. The headline ran across the digital banner of the local news station. It was shared on Facebook. It was retweeted by disability advocacy groups. It was picked up by the New York dailies within the hour. The article was brutal. It described the alleged incident in the dining room. It described the alleged hurling of a priceless vase. It included a blurred photo I had taken of Bella's stitched forehead in the hospital waiting room. The narrative Arthur had tried to construct, the drunk son, the chaotic accident, crumbled under the weight of one specific detail I had given Claire. The police officer who took the statement was on Arthur's private security payroll. By 2 p.m, news vans were parked outside the iron gates of Arthur's estate. They were sharks smelling blood in the water. Then, we dropped the second bomb. We did not release the medical records publicly. That would be illegal. Instead, I sent a courier to the house, a licensed process server. He delivered a single document to Arthur, a petition for emergency custody of the family assets based on mental incapacity and fraud. Attached to the petition, as an exhibit, was the paternity test. We leaked the existence of the petition to Claire. Miller Dynasty in Chaos, The Cuckoo in the Nest. The article speculated that Kevin, the golden boy, the heir apparent who had been whisked away to Europe, was not a biological Miller. It hinted that Arthur had been duped. It suggested that the man who prided himself on superior stock had spent millions raising another man's son while abusing his own flesh and blood. The reaction was nuclear. I watched it unfold on the small television in our living room. It was like watching a building implode in slow motion. My phone rang. It was not Arthur. It was the crushing silence of Arthur not calling that was deafening. Instead, it was the Child Protective Services caseworker. Mrs. Miller, this is Sarah Jenkins from Child Protective Services. My heart tightened. This was the one wild card. Yes, I answered. I am standing outside your building, she said. I need to come up. We received a report last night regarding your daughter. Mark froze near the window. He looked ready to fight. Let her in, I whispered to him. Sarah Jenkins was a tired-looking woman in a beige cardigan. She walked into our apartment, her eyes scanning the room. She saw the peeling paint. She saw the mismatched furniture, but she also saw the drawings on the fridge. She saw the clean clothes folded on the sofa. She saw Bella sitting on the rug, reading a book, her bandage stark white against her skin. I am here to investigate a claim of neglect and endangerment, Mrs. Jenkins said, sitting on the edge of the velvet armchair. The report states that the father was intoxicated and caused an injury during a domestic dispute. That report was filed by a man who is currently hiding from the press because he assaulted a minor. I said calmly. I placed the discharge papers from the hospital on the table. The doctor's notes are in there. I said, the angle of the wound, the bruising on her chest where she was shoved. It is consistent with a push. Mrs. Jenkins, not a fall. Mrs. Jenkins looked at the papers. She looked at Mark, who was standing protectively over Bella. I saw the news, Mrs. Jenkins admitted, her official demeanor softening slightly. It is everywhere. My father-in-law is a powerful man, I said. He tried to take our child because she has Down syndrome. He calls her defective. He offered us $2 million to divorce so Mark could breed a better heir. Mrs. Jenkins' eyes widened. He said that? He said it at the dinner table, Mark added, his voice steady, before he threw my daughter into a wall because she touched a vase. Mrs. Jenkins looked at Bella. Bella looked up and waved. Hi, Bella said. Mrs. Jenkins closed her folder. I need to do a standard home inspection. She said, I need to check the fridge and the sleeping arrangements. But, so you Xingho Lin, 2# is greater than given the context, and given the public allegations against the grandfather, Saoyutsing Haling, 2 is greater than I. Am not inclined to remove the child from the home today. Thank you, Mark breathed, his shoulders sagging with relief. However, Mrs. Jenkins added, standing up, if you go back to that house, if you expose her to him again, I will have to intervene. That environment is clearly toxic. We are never going back. I said. She left. We had survived the first wave, but the real fallout was happening across town. Claire texted me at 4 o'clock. He resigned. I stared at the screen. Resigned from what? I typed back. Everything. The hospital board, the country club board, the historical society. They asked him to step down. The defective comment got out. The audio from the 911 call. Saoyutsing Haling, 2 is greater than someone leaked it. You can hear him screaming about the vase while the kid is crying. It is over. Sophie, he is radioactive. I walked to the window. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the parking lot. Arthur Miller had spent 80 years building a fortress of reputation. He had constructed walls of money and moats of influence. He believed he was untouchable because he was rich. He believed he was superior because of his DNA. And in less than 12 hours, a mother with a high school diploma and a defective daughter had dismantled it all. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought I would feel joy. But as I looked at the rusted sedan below, I felt a strange, cold emptiness. He was destroyed. Yes, but we were still poor. The checkbook was gone. The $2 million was a ghost. We had burned the bridge that led to the gold mine. Mark came up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist. We did it, he whispered. He cannot hurt us anymore. No, I said softly. He cannot, but I was not thinking about safety. I was thinking about the look on Arthur's face when he read the DNA test. I was thinking about the moment he realized that the only thing he truly loved, his legacy, Vasily. I wondered if he was sitting in that big, empty dining room right now, staring at the shattered porcelain on the floor. I hoped he was, because the worst part was not the public humiliation. The headlines would fade. The scandal would pass. The worst part was the truth. He was an old man dying in a museum of his own making, and the only blood he had left in the world was the blood he had spilled on the floor. The phone rang again. I stared at it. It was Henderson. Do not answer it. Mark said. I picked it up. Sophie. Henderson said. His voice was urgent. What is it? He had a stroke. Henderson said. A real one this time. My hand tightened on the phone. When, 20 minutes ago, the maid found him. He was clutching the paternity test. He is in the intensive care unit at Greenwich Hospital. Is he? Saoyutsing Haling, 2 is greater than dead? I asked. No, Henderson said, but it is massive. He is incapacitated. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why are you calling me? I asked. Because, Sophie, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Since Karen is legally disowned and there is no other power of attorney, Saoyutsing Haling, 2 is greater than Mark, is the next of kin. I looked at Mark. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Henderson said, that as of 20 minutes ago, Mark is in charge of everything. The medical decisions, the estate, the money. I hung up the phone. I turned to Mark. Get your coat? I said. What happened? Mark asked. Your father is in the hospital. I said. Mark's face fell. Is he? Saoyutsing Haling. Jinghao Dayu. He is alive. I said. I walked to the closet and grabbed my purse, but he is helpless. Mark, and you are in charge. I opened the door. The hallway of the apartment building smelled of onions and floor wax. "We are going to the hospital," I said. "Why?" Mark asked. "To say goodbye?" "No," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "We are going to see what $2 million looks like when it cannot speak." The intensive care unit on the 4th floor was a world away from the chaotic emergency room where we had sat just hours earlier. Here, the silence was expensive. The air was filtered to a crisp, sterile chill that smelled of ozone and rubbing alcohol. The floor tiles were not linoleum but a muted slate, designed to absorb the sound of footsteps so the dying could fade away without disturbance. I walked beside Mark, our shoes making soft, rhythmic thuds against the floor. I held his hand. His palm was cold, but he was not shaking anymore. The panic had burned itself out, leaving behind a hollow, charred exhaustion. A nurse sat behind a high station, illuminated by the blue glow of multiple monitors. She looked up as we approached. She did not ask for identification. She knew who we were. The news cycle had done its job. We were the new owners of the tragedy in room 402. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she said softly. Standing up, "Dr. Evans is in with him now." "Thank you," Mark said. His voice sounded foreign, deeper somehow, stripped of the nervous pitch that usually accompanied his interactions with authority figures. We walked to the door. It was heavy, made of solid wood with a small glass observation pane. Mark hesitated. He put his hand on the metal handle but did not push. He looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed. "I do not know if I can see him," Mark whispered. "I do not know who I am going to see. The monster? Or just an old man? You will see both," I said, covering his hand with mine on the handle. "But neither of them can hurt you anymore." I pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the amber readout of the life support machines and the ambient light from the city skyline outside the window. In the center of the room, surrounded by a fortress of medical technology, lay Arthur Miller. He looked small. That was the first thing that struck me. Without his tailored suits, without his booming voice, without the pedestal of his ego, he was just a collection of failing organs wrapped in pale, papery skin. A plastic tube was taped to his mouth. Another ran into his arm. Wires snaked from his chest to the monitor that beeped a slow, steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. It was the only sound in the room. Dr. Evans turned from the bedside. He was a tall man with silver hair and a face etched with professional sympathy. "Mark," he said, nodding. "Sophie, how is he?" Mark asked, walking slowly to the foot of the bed. "He is stable, in the strictest sense of the word," Dr. Evans said, "but the stroke was massive. It occurred in the brainstem. It has caused significant damage to the neural pathways that control movement and speech." "Can he hear us?" I asked. I walked to the side of the bed. I looked down at Arthur. His eyes were open. One eyelid drooped slightly, a vestige of the neurological storm that had ravaged his brain. But the eyes themselves, Saoyutsing Haoling, 2# is greater than they were awake. They were darting frantically from Mark to me, then to the doctor, then back to me. They were blue pools of pure, unadulterated terror. "Yes," Dr. Evans said quietly. "We believe his cognitive functions are largely intact. He can see, he can hear, he can understand everything we are saying, but he cannot move, he cannot speak, he cannot even swallow on his own." I looked at Arthur. I leaned in close, invading his personal space in a way I never would have dared yesterday. I saw the recognition in his eyes. I saw the hate, but mostly, I saw the helplessness. He was screaming behind those eyes, screaming commands, screaming insults, screaming for control. But nothing came out except the mechanical hiss of the ventilator. It is called locked-in syndrome. Dr. Evans explained. He is a prisoner in his own body. Mark let out a ragged breath. He reached out and touched the railing of the bed. Is it permanent? Mark asked. It is unlikely he will regain significant function, the doctor admitted. With extensive therapy, he might regain some movement in his fingers or facial muscles, but for all intents and purposes, this is his new reality. The doctor excused himself, leaving us alone with the man who had tried to destroy us. The silence returned, heavier this time. Mark pulled a chair up to the bedside and sat down. He looked at his father's hand, which lay limp on the white sheet. The same hand that had signed the eviction notice. The same hand that had shoved Bella. I watched my husband. I waited for him to yell. I waited for him to cry. I waited for him to exact some verbal revenge. But Mark just sighed. It was a long, shuddering exhale that seemed to release 40 years of tension. You wanted a legacy, Dad, Mark whispered to the silent figure. You wanted perfection. Arthur's eyes widened. He stared at Mark, desperate to respond. We know about Kevin. Mark said simply, we know he is not yours. We know you spent 5 years grooming a stranger while you let your own granddaughter suffer. The monitor's rhythm increased slightly. Beep, 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 beep. Arthur's distress was visible on the screen, translated into jagged green lines. It does not matter now. Mark continued, his voice devoid of malice. Karen is gone. The money she took is gone. The reputation you built is gone. Mark stood up. He did not look angry anymore. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy backpack he had been carrying since childhood. I am the guardian now. To Dad, Mark said. Henderson filed the papers an hour ago. Since you are incapacitated, I make the decisions. I control the accounts. I control the estate. I control your care. Arthur's eyes shifted to me. He was pleading. He was looking at the woman he had called a gold digger, the woman he had tried to buy off, begging for an ally. I stepped forward. I looked down at him with a cold, clinical detachment. Do not worry, Arthur, I said softly. We will take very good care of you. We will make sure you get exactly what you deserve. I saw a tear leak from the corner of his eye. It tracked through the deep wrinkles of his cheek and disappeared into the pillow. It was a tear of frustration, not remorse. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was sorry he had lost. We walked out of the room 10 minutes later. The hallway felt miles long. We walked in silence until we reached the elevator. When the doors closed, sealing us in the metal box, Mark leaned his head against the wall and closed his eyes. Is it over? He asked. I looked at the floor indicator lights changing. 4, 3, 2. Yes, I said. It is over. But as we walked out into the cool night air of the parking lot, I did not feel the elation I had expected. I felt a strange, hollow ache in my chest. We had won. We had the money. We had the power. We had the house. We had punished the villain. But I closed my eyes and I could still see Bella's blood on the hardwood floor. I could still hear the sound of the porcelain shattering. I could still feel the phantom weight of the checkbook in my hand. The moment I had almost sold my soul, the victory was complete. But it was not clean. It was stained with the ugly things we had been forced to do, the ugly truths we had been forced to weaponize. Mark opened the car door for me. He paused, looking back at the hospital tower, a monolith of concrete and glass against the night sky. He is going to live a long time. Is he not? Mark asked. Yes, I said, looking at the single lit window on the 4th floor. He has the best healthcare money can buy. He could live for 10 years. 10 years of staring at the ceiling. Mark murmured. 10 years of thinking about his mistake. It is a high price, I said. Mark got into the driver's seat. He started the engine. He set the price. Mark said, "We are just collecting the bill." We drove home to the apartment in Bridgeport for the last time. Tomorrow, we would move, not back to the estate. I could not bear to live in that mausoleum, but to somewhere new, somewhere safe. But as I watched the streetlights flicker past, I realized that the scar on Bella's forehead would fade, but it would never disappear. And the scar on my conscience, the cold, hard place where my empathy used to be, that was permanent too. Arthur had called Bella defective. He was wrong. She was perfect. We were the ones who were defective now. We were the ones who had been broken and glued back together with jagged edges. I reached back and touched Bella's car seat, even though she was not there. She was staying with a neighbor. I needed to remind myself why I had done it. I did it for her. I repeated it like a mantra. I did it for her. But deep down, in the quiet dark of the car, I wondered if I had also done it for me. I wondered if I had enjoyed watching the light of fear ignite in the old man's eyes. And that was the most terrifying thought of all. The facility was called Silver Hollow Estates. It was nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York, a place where the air was crisp and the silence cost $15,000 a month. From the outside, it looked like a boutique hotel or a country club for the retired elite. There were manicured gardens, a quiet pond, and a lobby with a grand piano that played Debussy on a programmed loop. But make no mistake, it was a prison. It was a very expensive, very comfortable waiting room for death. I walked across the polished marble floor, my heels clicking with a sound that demanded authority. I was wearing a camel hair coat and oversized sunglasses. The kind of woman Arthur would have once approved of. The kind of woman who looked like she owned the building. And in a way, I did. Or at least, the trust fund I managed did. Mark walked beside me. He had filled out in the last 6 months. The gray pallor of poverty was gone, replaced by the healthy glow of a man who played golf on Tuesdays and slept 8 hours a night. He carried Bella in his arms. She was 6 years old now, heavier, taller, her heart beating strong and steady thanks to the surgery Arthur's money had paid for. We stopped at the nurse station. The head administrator, a woman named Mrs. Vance with a smile as tight as her bun, stood up to greet us. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she cooed. "So good to see you. And little Bella, how is he today?" Mark asked. His voice was casual, like he was asking about the weather. Mrs. Vance Seahill, glancing at her clipboard, "He is so hao ling. De dièse est supérieur à stable." His vitals are excellent. His heart is strong, but his mood seems to be declining. We tried to wheel him into the common room for movie night yesterday, but he became very agitated. His heart rate spiked. "We told you," I said, my voice smooth and cool. "He does not like crowds. He does not like noise. My father-in-law was a very private man. He prefers solitude." "Of course." Mrs. Vance nodded. "We have kept him in his room as requested. No television, no radio. We removed the books as well, since he cannot turn the pages himself, and it seemed to frustrate him." "Perfect," I said. It was the ultimate sensory deprivation. Arthur, a man who had feasted on control and attention his entire life, was now starving for it. We were not hurting him physically. We were simply erasing the world around him, inch by inch, until the only thing left was his own thoughts. We walked to room 312. It was the corner suite, the most expensive one in the facility. It had a panoramic view of the forest. I pushed the door open. Arthur sat in his high-tech wheelchair by the window. He was dressed in a silk robe, a blanket tucked neatly over his legs. His head was propped up by a specialized neck brace. He heard us enter. His head could not turn, but his eyes, Haling, 2 hashes greater than his eyes, snapped toward the door instantly. They were wide, alert, furious. "Hello, Dad," Mark said. Mark set Bella down. She was wearing a bright pink dress and carrying a new tablet computer, one of the most expensive models on the market. "Go say hi to Grandpa." "Bella," I whispered. Bella trotted over to the wheelchair. She was not afraid of him anymore. To her, he was just a quiet old man who looked at her funny. "Hi, Grandpa," Bella chirped. She climbed onto the ottoman in front of him. She held up her tablet. "Look, I have a new game. It costs money." She tapped the screen. Colorful gems exploded with a cheerful dinging sound. Arthur stared at her. His gaze drifted from her face to the tablet, then to the diamond bracelet on my wrist, then to Mark's Italian loafers. He was doing the math. He was calculating the burn rate of his fortune. I walked over and stood behind him. I placed my hands on the handles of his wheelchair. I leaned down, my lips brushing against his ear. He smelled of lavender soap and antiseptic. "She is doing great in school, Arthur," I whispered. "We hired a private tutor, the best in the state, $400 an hour." Arthur's eyes twitched. "And we sold the house," I continued softly. "The Greenwich estate. We did not want to live there. Too many bad memories. We sold it to a developer." I felt a vibration in the chair, a low, guttural sound trapped in his throat. "They are going to bulldoze it." "Arthur," I said, twisting the knife. "They are turning the land into a subdivision. Affordable housing. 50 units. His eyes were bulging now. The veins in his forehead stood out. The legacy he had built, the physical monument to his ego, was being scraped off the earth to make room for the people he despised. "And the company?" I added. "Mark is liquidating the assets. We are moving the capital into a blind trust for Bella." I walked around the chair so he could see my face. I wanted him to see me smiling, not a cruel smile, a happy one. "She is going to spend it all, Arthur," I said. "Every single penny you hoarded. She's going to spend it on toys, and trips, and happiness. She's going to waste your fortune on joy." A tear leaked out of his left eye. It slid down his paralyzed cheek. Bella looked up from her game. She saw the tear. "Oh no," Bella said. "Grandpa is sad." She reached into her pocket. She pulled out a tissue. With clumsy, gentle hands, she wiped the tear from the old man's face. "Do not cry, Grandpa," Bella said sweetly. "It is okay. I love you." The irony was shattering. The child he had rejected, the child he had called defective, was the only person in the world showing him kindness. She was the only one touching him with anything other than professional obligation. Arthur looked at her. For a second, the rage in his eyes flickered and died, replaced by something else. Something dark and bottomless. Regret, shame, or perhaps just the crushing realization that he had been wrong about everything. He had spent his life looking for a king to inherit his kingdom, but he had missed the angel standing right in front of him. "Time to go," Mark said from the doorway. He checked his new Rolex. "We have a reservation for lunch." I patted Arthur on the shoulder. "Goodbye, Arthur," I said. "We will visit again next month, or maybe the month after. We are going to Paris for the spring. Bella wants to see the Eiffel Tower. First class?" "Of course." I took the handles of his wheelchair. I turned him away from the window. I turned him away from the view of the world he could no longer touch. I pushed him until he was facing the blank, big wall of the room. "There," I said. "Peace and quiet, just like you wanted." We walked out. Bella skipped ahead, holding Mark's hand, chattering about ice cream. I paused at the door and looked back. Arthur Miller sat alone in the center of the room, staring at the wall. He was a billionaire. He was a genius. He was a patriarch. And he was completely, utterly obsolete. I closed the door. The latch clicked with a finality that echoed in my soul. As we walked out into the sunshine, I took a deep breath. The air smelled of freedom. The defective child was going to inherit the earth, and the perfect man was going to rot in the prison of his own perfection. Instant karma. It turned out, was not a lightning strike. It was a slow, quiet, and very expensive check that Arthur Miller would be paying for the rest of his life. I smiled, took my husband's hand, and walked away from the silence, stepping into the noise and the mess of a beautiful, imperfect life.